All right, welcome to the August 11th, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. We'll get started in a couple minutes. I will do a quick audio test to make sure everything is transmitting fine. Okay, so it sounds like audio is going through fine. So for those of us that haven't been on a Club Cubase Google Hangout before, how it works is we will we're gonna give some people some time to get logged in. You could introduce yourself if you're watching this live. You could introduce yourself in the comments in the chat area. And you could also, if you're not watching this live, you don't have to introduce yourself if you're watching on a replay. So you could introduce yourself and you could ask questions there. You could also submit questions in advance. Let me just have a couple of different playback streams here. Let me just All right, so now we won't hear echoes of going on. So how this works is you could ask questions in the chat field if you haven't sent them in advance. We will try to go through as many of the questions as completely and succinctly as possible. And we'll try to go through the questions chronologically. So if you ask the same question over and over and over again, it won't necessarily get your question answered any faster. So but we'll try to go with several hours today. There will be an index of all the topics and questions that were asked in the Hangout today. So we'll try to get that either late tonight or early tomorrow morning. So you could jump to specific timestamps if you want. And like many of you during kind of the pandemic, my family is at home. So I may have to take a little break just to help my son maybe get a show on after our babysitter leaves. So there may be a couple of interruptions, and also my wife is working directly above me, so you may hear her walking, or she's often on a conference call as well. So I'll apologize for any interruptions in advance, and we'll get started here in just a few minutes, letting people get logged in. So we'll just... Let's see who's on a Hangout. So we have Tim from Mission Viejo. All right. So we have Santiago from LA. All right. So we have Pinder. He's from the UK. Okay. Okay, so number of questions coming in. So we have David from India. We have Lawrence from Rhode Island. We have Finland. We have Hans from the Netherlands, Slovenia, Sweden. Sir Robert from Atlanta. Good to see you on a Hangout. Longtime Steinberg advocate for us in the Atlanta area. All right, more people from Amsterdam, where it's apparently 90 degrees in the backyard. Thanks for making that into Fahrenheit for us ignorant Americans, but I think it's probably 33 Celsius maybe. Just a guess on my part. We have Hampton, Georgia. All right, so we have Neil from Antarctica via Greencastle, Pennsylvania. I always wanted to get someone live from Antarctica on the Hangout. All right, so we have Chile, Matt from Fort Wayne. Okay, so, all right, so we have Matt from Maryland. And occasionally, just like my chat timeline will jump, so I may lose some questions kind of in the middle of the Hangout. We'll try to get through as many questions. Okay. All right, so we have Moin from Hamburg. All right, so Slovenia, we have Iran. All right, so we have Stefan from Sweden. We have Oren Bynum. Good to see you on the Hangout. All right, so we have Austin, Texas. All right, John Wells is ready to learn new things. That's good. Hopefully you'll... All right, so Keys from Atlanta. All right, Jason from South Shields, England. We have Connecticut. We have New Jersey. All right, Sweden, Turkey. Indonesia. We have Ted from Sherman Oaks. Millard Brown from Pennsylvania. We have Belgium, El Salvador. All right, Lawrence was in Antarctica for a couple weeks in February, but the internet was not great on the ship, so that's good. I appreciate you trying. All right, we have Michael from Weatherford, Texas, so we'll get started here in a few minutes. I usually announce this, but if you're watching this live, you may want to skip ahead to about 10 minutes is usually when people are logged in. All right, so we have California as well. And if you guys want to start asking questions, we could enter those in the comments field. All right, so we have Northern Georgia, in the foothills of the Appalachian Trail. We have Croatia. We have Agent K's on the Hangout. Okay, so we have John from Kenosha. All right, so we have Vancouver. Beautiful city. Okay, so wait just a couple more minutes. I see a comment, get on with it. So we'll wait. Just people are still getting logged in, so we'll get started here in about a minute. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. First question from Tim Weinheimer. Hi, Greg. It's Tim from Mission Viejo. When I save a project, it creates an empty file, adds a new project folder, sub-file number. When go back to look at the file is empty. Is it a setting? Thanks. So when you're working kind of with a project, you know, one of the things that's helpful to do is when you go file to new project, you'll get the hub. So here you can see kind of recent projects, but there's also different templates. And as we kind of work with this, one of the things that it'll default to is using a default location, but also try to I prefer to have it prompt for the project location. And this way, every time that you record files, it'll go into your defined folder as opposed to kind of a generic, like into your music subfolder. And at this point, you could create empty and you could choose the folder for the particular project. So if I wanted to come here, we could put it into this particular folder. And now every time that I record audio files and I start working, it will, at this point, just, replace all of the audio files directly into that particular folder. So as we do this, we now want to, but the actual project file hasn't been saved. So what you want to do is choose to do like a save function. And since it's going to go directly within the folder, but it may make sense to quickly save the project and give it a name. So you just call it whatever. And at this point, you could choose to just save that file because you could be recording audio files and not have the project that is referencing all the audio files in the folder that is also being able to, call up those different files and MIDI information. So make sure that when you're doing it, that you actually, go through that, it makes a lot of sense to, very intentionally create a project and think of every project as being in its own unique folder, and that should help. And then as soon as you have everything set up, save, and then it'll just kind of automatically do the, by default, it'll do the, auto save and create kind of backups for you once you do that. But if you haven't saved the project initially, I see people kind of get hung up in that. So try that, and I think that'll help. Okay, so we had a question from Pinder. How to assign a Kai MPD 218 pad buttons with generic remote with functions like split at cursor, copy paste, but still use it to trigger my drum machine software. So what I would do is probably the MPD 218 pad. I assume that it probably has 16 pads or maybe 18 pads with a clever name like MPD 218. And it probably has a bank button. So I would assign one bank or particular MIDI notes. And, there's probably a few drum kits that are going to use all 128 MIDI notes. So when you assign and we go to our generic remote setup, I would go to kind of an unused bank within that and use those pads within the bank to trigger out the generic remote. So if you wanted to add a generic remote, we could, at this point, just click on the plus sign. We'll see generic remote. And then you could assign these pads and you could just do it through the MIDI learn function. And again, just use ones that you're not going to use all the time for kick and snare and hi-hat and, the typical banks. So assign kind of like, an outlier bank, if you will. So we'll just say, I want this to go from my Nectar panorama. So I will come here and I'll just do a quick MIDI learn and we could capture that particular note. And at this point, we could say, I want this to be for command and I want this to, you can probably look under edit and let's say, all right, just try to find split at cursor. So at this point you could just come and search for split at cursor. And that way that particular MIDI note that you've set up will do a split at cursor. So again, just kind of use maybe a different bank because once that MIDI note or that MIDI message is assigned to a function, it's going to be kind of it could be messy using it for normal triggering MIDI notes messages. Okay, so we have a question. In Vari Audio, any way to prevent segments from moving, resetting after editing the segment, quantize, straighten, then later changes its start and end? Can the tabs default to start and end and not warp? So let's go ahead and take a quick look. Activate this project. Okay, let's just get to very audio here. Okay, so anyway, to prevent the segments from moving, resetting after editing the segment, quantize straighten, then later changing its start end. Can the end tabs default to start end and not warp? So as you go to move, different notes here, I think once we, if I wanted to change like the start of a particular note, we could adjust kind of like this. So it's really kind of, if you don't want it to move and maybe I'm misunderstanding, it's like I would just make sure that, you don't go to that particular, control and adjust. So I'm just going to kind of just read it. So to prevent the segments, removing, resetting after editing the segment. So, I would, before you start doing stuff, I would make sure that you have kind of all the rhythmic elements defined and edited before probably doing very audio. So, if you're still doing like kind of rhythmic stuff, I would, wait until everything is kind of laid out and then maybe choose to do very audio after. But, if you don't, adjust here, it's not going to, and it's easy to not adjust kind of those particular functions. But if I'm misunderstanding, just let me know. Okay, so question on generic mode. If you assign a MIDI note, middle C in your keyboard to call up a logical editor, does that mean you can't use it to record a MIDI note C because the button is being used by generic remote? Yes. So, once the function is going to be defined in, as a generic remote, it's going to do that particular function. So again, like as we discussed before, try to do it, for an octave that you're not going to normally use, go to a particular octave and hit that, or just, I know a lot of people that have, a MIDI controller that's just dedicated just to editing functions for their generic remote as well. Okay, let's move on to different questions. Okay, so question, I have 6 knobs in my Akai MPD 218. I want to control gain, Q, frequency on all bands. That's 12 knobs. How do I do that? Do I need another MIDI controller with more knobs? So, if you wanted to control all the different functions, having, an equal number of functions, per tactile control is obviously helpful. A lot of controllers to kind of mitigate this. Like I know a lot of the Yamaha keyboards will have like 4 sliders and a shift button. And if you hit the shift button, the 4 sliders will do kind of alternate function. So you could have, let's say, MIDI CC 40, 41, 42, 43. You hit the shift button, and then those same 4 sliders would go to 44, 45, 46, 47. So see if your MPD has a function like that, and then it would probably make more sense. So often when there's a limited number of controllers, there may be kind of a shift that could have that one control be able to kind of, by hitting the shift button, be able to transmit different MIDI CCs. Okay. A nice comment. Someone appreciate from checking in from tropical Amsterdam, 90 degrees. I appreciate your enormous knowledge of Cubase and your patience in answering all of our questions. I hope it's helpful for people. So thank you for the nice comment. Okay, so from Valencia Song and Score, Cubase Pro 10.5 is freezing when I move left and right on the track and or piano roll windows. It freezes Cubase and the whole computer. I have a new Mac Pro with 96 gigs of memory, an updated graphics card, etc. So, it seems like maybe as you're doing this, if you're navigating, that it's causing issues for you. So I haven't really seen that act up. What I would maybe do, just out of curiosity, and sometimes when it's little odd things like this, I would try to maybe restart and while holding down, start the program. So as soon as you start the program, after, double clicking on the icon, or when a program is first starting down, try holding down Command, Option, Shift, and hold those down, and you'll be prompted if you want to, you could delete the program preferences or disable the program preferences. So I would try, doing that and see if that resolves the issue. So often with things like that, that will often kind of take care of just little odd things like that. So I would give that a try, but I haven't really seen it, and you should be fine with your Mac like that. Okay, so hi Greg, is a question. Matt from Maryland, so not too far from me. I'm broadcasting from outside DC area in Alexandria, Virginia. Question: what's the best stock plugin to replace an SSL bus compressor, etc.? So a lot of people just will use, the standard compressor to do that. So, if we're here, let's go ahead and we'll just take a listen. And a lot of people just kind of do. So just using kind of even just the stock compression, can do really well. So let's say I just want it like maybe a 4:1. It's kind of a typical. And let me just jump back here in time. So, that's a great compressor. If you wanted a little more flavor, people will tend to use, and it's not necessarily like a, in the SSL vein, but if you go to, the tube compressor or the vintage compressor, those are also great choices. But any of those will work as, you're on your tube bus, and you could just access them all directly from here. So if you want to have the tube compressor, a lot of people will use that. A lot of people also just will use the vintage compressor and be able to, get great results just using that. Okay. Okay, so a question from David Williams. Can you please how to select multiple tracks and mute or solo it? Do the same actions on the project page itself. So let's say if I come here and I'll just select a couple of tracks, I'll hide the lower zone. So let's say if I just wanted to do that, one of the things that we could do is just, there's some different, you could do some of this stuff, like if it's only for selected tracks using the Project Logical editor. So if you wanted to come here, you could say, I want to transform, And you could say we want to do media type or container type is equal to track, and property is, event is selected, and we want to do a track operation, and we just want it to solo track. So at this point, you could, set up different track controls functions just for that. So if you wanted to solo, toggle solo states, you could do stuff like that as well. So, check out, and you can make these, different project logical editor presets. You could also, a lot of people will do a track invisibility setting. So if we come to the settings cogwheel in the upper right hand corner, you could also do stuff like, okay, I only want to see my selected tracks. So we could say show only selected tracks, and then, you could solo all tracks and mute tracks, or, so that's, you could also kind of make macros and do stuff like that. So those are a couple of different ways to accomplish that. Okay, so, all right, so seeing Simone Valdivia, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. So he just recently upgraded from LE8 to Elements 10.5. Congratulations. So another question from Pinder, one of two. So I can't resize Cubase. The bar that says file, edit, project, audio, etc. It seems to stay pinned. Even when I minimize the bar, it stays pinned unless I press again. So when we do this, and it may be slightly different, we could minimize a project, and then, the menus aren't necessarily associated with the project, but they're going to be associated with the program level. So you could have, multiple projects as independent floating windows. You have one project active at once, but multiple projects open. But that won't, this will be kind of until these menus will be present, until you actually get to the point where you close the program. So that's why you may not see it kind of follow the changes, with the project as you close or change the size. All right. Question: what are the most important changes from one version to another? So, probably from Elements to 10.5, there's obviously a newer audio engine. There's a high DPI, and I'm assuming this is from Elements 8 to Elements 10.5. There's going to be, a wealth of new plugins and new sounds. But it's hard to answer what the most important changes are. From every version, from like an 8 to an 8.5, an 8.5 to a 9, a 9.5 to 10 to 10.5. There's probably, on the Cubase Pro, there's probably about 150 new features for each of those. And, some of the features are applicable for your workflow and some may not be. So it's hard to say what are the most important changes, because what's important to one person may not be to the others. And a lot of times I'm kind of dealing more in the Pro version, but, I think, check out probably the mix console, like the channel strip has been redone, new plugins, and of course you have a new high DPI user interface as well. So, a lot of things have been kind of completely redone for user interface. So another question from Hinder, this may be continuation. If I try to resize the Cubase, it only resizes the project, leaving the bar pinned to the top as part of the desktop windows. Yeah, so again, the project, and this is, as we discussed a little bit earlier, just a moment ago, there's, you have the Cubase program that's open, and that's what the menus are being derived from. And then you're going to have the projects, and the projects are independent of those. So you could switch from one project to another quite easily. All right, so please tell me specification, the spec window to run Cubase 10 Pro. I think a lot of people, I think you could run it on, an i5 processor with 8 gigs of RAM. A lot of people tend to go for like a Ryzen processor, an AMD side, or an Intel i7 and 16 gigs of RAM. That's kind of where a lot of people end up, but you could run it on smaller systems as well. And you could check what the actual system requirements are. There's kind of a minimum. There's usually like a minimum system requirement and a suggested size. But, a lot of people are running with i5s and 8 gigs of RAM without too many problems. Okay, how do I extract melody completely from audio mixdown? So if you have, this isn't a part of Cubase, but you could actually kind of do this within, using a tool, spectral layers. So if I wanted to come and let me just do a new project, and sometimes my computer doesn't cooperate with this, but I'll just see if we could find a file here. And Spectral Layer 7 has just been released. And let me see if I could find a file that I could use to show this. And I'm just going to open up a file that I've never tried this on, so we'll give it a shot. Let's see if this is... Okay, so I'll just take this, and what I want to do now is launch Spectral Layers. And we could do this, and again, this is an add-on function in Cubase, an add-on tool, and Spectral Layers just released last week. But we could do this through like an extension. And now it's going to launch that particular file in Spectral Layers. And Spectral Layers allows us to do kind of spectral editing, so we can get an idea of kind of what the frequencies look like on, or what the audio looks like. And we see kind of the bottom of the spectral graph is going to be set for low frequencies, mid-range. So as we just kind of take this particular file, and I will just come right over here and say, let's go to layer, and I'll say unmixed stems. So I'll hit OK. And this will do an analysis of the song. And now it's broken down the vocals. So let's just listen to just the vocals. So, and as we kind of, so at this point you could take different components. So if you wanted to just take the drums, so, you're able to kind of take, different components and split it up like that. So, so at that point you could check out, using spectral layers, and that's a way to kind of extract the vocals from a 2-track mix. So. And I think I have a file that that might work with this well. So let me just try it one more time, and there's a file that I'll just start off here. And this is like pretty scary stuff that you're able to do this. So let's say, let me just find this one particular file. Okay, I think this will. So say. So I'll just take this particular file here. And we'll go into spectral layers through the extensions. And again, I'll just get a layer and we'll say unmixed stems. Give it a minute here. All right, we can see the progress indicator. So there's like a 6-minute audio file. So now we could just take the vocals out, and if I wanted to take the bass out, put the bass back in, and let's just solo the vocals. And even if we get to harmonies, I don't care about you anyway. And listen to that in context. No. I don't care about what you've got. We could solo the drums. And this is a live recording with. So we want to just isolate the guitar. So just mute the vocals. You could just do it. And now put the vocals back in. So that's how you could do it using kind of spectral layers. All right, so we have Katie Marie, so first time on a Cubase Hangout from Austin, Texas. Welcome to the Hangout. Okay, so we have hey Greg, can I run my libraries for things like Halligan 6 and the Grand on external SSD without any performance bottleneck? Samsung's new T drives have 1 gigabyte rewrite speeds on USB 3.2s. Is fast enough. A lot of people do that. So when you want to work with those different aspects, really all you have to do is, once you're, there's a utility called the Steinberg Library Manager. So I will just come here to applications and let's just say Steinberg Library Manager. And to move all the content, all you would have to do is just kind of go over here. You'll see all of your different Halligan libraries that will show up. And at this point, you can just click on move, and then that will just move it to your other drive. So if you have a lot of other things going on that particular USB bus, it might be a problem, but most people are running, very similar setups to having, different USB, SSD drives and don't have, problems with it. All right, so you see P. Stevens from Houston, Texas. My brother lives there, so been there many times. Okay, so we had Someone asking, is anybody getting Cubase 10.5 to read waves plugin Backstreet? So I don't have that plugin, but maybe other people on the Hangouts could chime in. All right. So we have, hello, Steinberg. I'm using Cubase from Indonesia. Great. Thanks for joining us on the Hangout. We have Ahmad from Burlington, New Jersey. All right. Okay, just going through introduction still. Okay, so question, can you please demo the set time at cursor function? Please change the tempo from the default and add 2 extra bars before 0, setting the time. So let me just take a look at that. I'm just going to put the library manager in my doc here. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look. I'll do... just activate this. Okay, so let's see, it's the set time at cursor. So I will come here. Okay, I'm just trying to remember the keyboard shortcut, so let me just look at it here. Might be input time. I'm just looking transport to maybe in here. Let me just see if it's set time at... might just be in the project setting. So let's say if I'm here, let me look in the project setup. You just want to make sure that it's the actual function that you're calling up. If it's... So make sure I'm doing it as described in the question. Okay, so maybe if you could tell me where you're getting the set time at cursor function from. But let's give it a shot. So let's say if I'm here and I want to go to my project setup. So let's say we're here and so let's say I want to switch this to, I'll just toggle this to seconds. So let's say if I just do this as 8 seconds. So now I have my project starting at 8 seconds, and then you said to add 2 bars before. So I will come here to my project setup, Shift S, and then we could add a display bar offset and hit OK. And then we could say you've modified the bar offset. Do you want to keep the position of content at its bar positions? You can say yes. And then if you had, let's say, just a quick event here that started at 8 seconds, and I hit Shift S, let's do 4 bars. So, but if you could just let me know if that's the set time at cursor function that you're dealing with for, that'd be helpful. Sorry if I got a little lost there. Okay, question, how can you import a drum? My chat field jumped. All right, sorry, let me navigate back. How can you import a drum MIDI file into an existing project and time it with the project tempo and with different track time shifts? So, anytime that you have a MIDI file itself, that will automatically follow. So let's say if I wanted to go to like drum beats here, so say I just drag that drum beat in and I'm playing the project. Because it's MIDI, unless you have the track set to linear mode, but usually by default, Cubase will set it to musical mode. So as I play back, and if I change the tempo, this will automatically adjust based on the tempo. So usually MIDI will automatically just follow whatever tempo that you have. So if I want to make this 140 beats a minute, Now this MIDI will automatically just follow at 140 BPM. Or 14 beats per minute. So say 140. So as I just drop in new tempos for MIDI files, they'll just, and let's say I want it to be 100. So MIDI generally will always follow. The only time it wouldn't do it is if the track was set to linear mode versus musical mode. Okay, so we have a question. I just got an Avid S1, which works pretty well with Cubase, but I'm having trouble setting up my sliders on the S1 so I could use them as CC controllers for orchestral samples like Spitfire Audio. Can I reorder the sliders so that slider 1 is dynamics, 2 is expression, and 3 is vibrato? Or am I limited to the order that Spitfire has already set up? So I'm not sure if the Avid S1 actually does MIDI CC data. I know Yukon generally itself doesn't actually do MIDI CC data, so there's a pretty strong chance that your S1 is not going to spit out MIDI CC1 data. So, and it's part of the Yukon protocol. It was never, I don't think it was ever kind of fully realized to do something simple like MIDI CC data. So it could be just a limitation of your S1 controller. It seems like, something that is so kind of, much more fancy than what you get on a MIDI controller with nice feeling faders or motorized. It would be nice, but many audio controllers don't spit out simple MIDI CC messages. So I'm afraid that it's just going to be a limitation of the S1 controller using the Yukon protocol, and you could see if it's actually spitting out MIDI CC just by going to a particular MIDI track. And once you're in the MIDI track, you could go to like a MIDI insert. And at this point, just put in there's a MIDI monitor, and you could just make sure that's turned on and see, but I don't think that the S1 is going to spit out MIDI CC data. So, and it's not a limitation of Cubase that's preventing that. So Cubase would take any incoming MIDI messages that you could do. So question, MIDI, is there a smart way to get legato automatic, for example, when stop record or something, i.e. instead of using menu functions MIDI, so generally, the MIDI messages, some instruments can be set up where it won't play. It'll hold until there's another note message. And often that could happen like when it's in monophonic mode. You could get into like some of the instruments. Let's look at, there'll be some different functions with like your trigger mode here. So where you could do like legato. And let me just find something that has a little more length in it. But it's really kind of, but generally the MIDI specification is, likes to see kind of the actual note and held, until, that note is released. So note on, note off message. So it may not automatically do that, but some synthesizers, I think you could do it in Retrolog with, going through some of the different re-triggering modes here, where you kind of do, but you could kind of play around with, some of these, but it's really kind of up to the instrument. And that's why, like a lot of times for bass parts, people do use the legato function to hold the note out until the next note starts. So. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. Can you please bring up your audio connections for me to look at? I was wondering if I have a glitch. It's hard to see the tab text when selected. My tab text is white, difficult to see. Thanks. So I think this may be a Mac PC thing with Cubase. So I think that you see very easily the label, but I think once you select it, that it's kind of the selection is white with white text, so it's hard to see. But if you kind of click somewhere else, you could jump. And I brought this to the attention of some of the product planning people, so hopefully we'll see maybe a fix to that. But I believe it's a bit different on Windows platform versus the Mac platform, so it may look a bit different. All right, so we have sub 403 in the Hangout. We have Dubai present, Taz from Dubai. So question, will Cubase 11 be released this year? I'm sure that there is a lot of developers in Hamburg that are working on new stuff all the time, and we generally don't talk about release dates of products until they're until they're actually released. So but Steinberg has a pretty consistent history of release dates for Cubase. Okay. Okay, this question's been killing me. Tempo mapping in Logic Pro, you can enter a range from one point to another and have the tempo slowly increase or decrease. Can you do the same in Cubase Pro? So let's have a tempo map here. So when we see a tempo map, let me activate it. You could have tempo map work in kind of two different ways. So you could have it automatically jump, and it's a bit hidden here, but there's also a ramp mode. So if you kind of click right here, at this point, you could just say, I want it to ramp up or down and have it, slightly go between those different values. So if that's kind of what you want to do, is just to have, a different, instead of, you could choose it for it to be jump, where it'll automatically just jump up or down based on where you click, and you could have it be a ramp. So you can say, I just want to gradually slow it down between those two. And if you have it set for automatic, it will just kind of follow whatever the last setting was, I believe. So if I just wanted to gradually go between those 2 points, you could do that. So see if that's what you want to accomplish. And it's once you go to the tempo map, you can kind of see it directly here. So it's not as obvious because it could be kind of a bit obscured by this particular function depending on your screen size. So you may have to just on the tempo track come here, and if you go to like the tempo editor, so I think it's just Control or Command T, that you could set up between kind of jumping and range mode here as well. So, but kind of slide out to the right and see if that kind of solves the problem between kind of gradually going versus kind of having a ramp, or a particular jump. Okay, question. Loaded 10.52, but kept getting the safe mode startup about every other time I started Cubase, and then as I remember, it would then lock up or shut down. I rolled back to 10.512. Any thoughts? Windows 10 PC. So generally, when you get the safe startup mode, that means that sometimes people get it when their computer shuts off every night, and it says it was kind of because you didn't physically quit the program. But a lot of times, what's causing that is a plugin that is causing Cubase to crash on exit. So a lot of there are a number of plugins that will kind of hold on to memory and not release memory. And when you get that startup message at the very top, it'll say, often it will say, we found a problem with this particular plugin. So it's indicating that there's a plugin that's causing problems in your system, and it's trying to allow you to start the program again in the diagnostic mode so that you could bypass that plugin so it's not doing it. So you're not just always wondering about kind of random instabilities. So the program's kind of pointing out, saying often this plugin is causing problems in your Cubase. This is crashing Cubase. So, you could start the program without the plugins, disable this particular one, and then be able to work. So that, it's not that it's anything wrong. I know it could be a little irritating, but it's also kind of gives you a good clue as to that there's a plugin that's causing issues with stability in your system. Okay. Cubase Pro 10.5, creating a new instrument track, for example, a trumpet. I can no longer control pitch bend and modulation from my MIDI controller. A Roland D10 on an existing instrument track. It does work. So let's come over here. So I'll just add an instrument. And I'll do just a quick Callion Sonic SE. And I'll find a brass. And sometimes with this, it could be depending on the actual, trumpet, the actual patch. So let's say if I just wanted to come here. So a lot of times, because each instrument sets its own pitch bend range. So make sure that within the instrument itself, and sometimes I think if you go to options, you could probably see, it's going to escape me, but like where the actual pitch bend range is for the instrument. So make sure that the instrument that you're setting actually has like the pitch bend range set. So sometimes, some instruments won't respond to pitch bend. So if it is with just one particular sound or not with a particular sound, so here, as I play, I have my... So I think it could be the particular instrument that you're working with that could be causing pitch bend. One other thing to check is if you go to preferences, you could come over here. It could be that under preferences, MIDI to MIDI filter, that during the through, you might have pitch bend be disabled here. So make sure you don't have any pitch bend being filtered out. So you may have it for record, but it may be, for existing tracks, it may play back, or so you could filter it out there under preferences, MIDI to MIDI filter. So make sure it isn't there. But a lot of times the pitch bend is set per the instrument. So, but, as you can see, if I just did a different trumpet source, let's say I go to, let's say just like maybe like a general MIDI type source. And I will try to find some brass in here. That now, when I play this particular voice, and if I wanted to try another trumpet voice that I'll replace it with from a different library, and then you could do, different key switches. But they all kind of work. So I don't think it's going to be a Cubase 10.5. And if you're concerned about if it's like the MIDI, check also your controller that it's transmitting. And one way to do that, again, is to just on the instrument track, go to MIDI inserts and just go to your MIDI monitor. And as we have that open, and I move my pitch bend, you should see pitch bend data being transmitted. So that way you can check to make sure that it's not your controller that's malfunctioning. Okay, so a question: when counting down to start recording, I get overlapping MIDI notes on the first notes played. Is that a common problem? So let me just revert this project here quickly. Okay, so let me just come here. So let's say if I have just and I put this into like a loop. So it says when counting down to start recording, I get overlapping MIDI notes on the first notes played. So sometimes what you get is so let's say I do something like that, and often a note that's supposed to be kind of maybe at the very end shows up at the very beginning. So here, like this note was actually intended to be just at the very end of this particular phrase, but it's actually showing up at the beginning because when it's cycled around, I was a little bit late. So often when I hear of stuff like this, it could be that, the note that was supposed to be right here at the very end shows up, on the cycle loop for record. So that's generally what happens in situations like that. But if you're probably not hearing it on the very first recording, but maybe on a next recording, especially if you're working with cycle mode. So if you're working with cycle mode, I think that's probably going to be the issue. So, okay, so. All right, so we have a question from Jay in New Haven, Connecticut. Were you able to go back and find out how you record all of your synth patches into your sound library? I searched desperately all weekend. So again, it's just going to be, what I do is just create kind of to do this. I think we covered this. I thought we might have been interrupted by my son when we were doing this previously. But I just will chromatically take, multiple notes. So let's say if I have this and I wanted to sample, these particular sounds. So I will load up an instance of Halion, the full Halion, not the Halion Sonic SE that comes with Cubase, but this is kind of the big boy. And I haven't done the actual sampling in a long time with this, but I've done it for some of my instruments that were slowly dying in hardware. But we'll come over here and just kind of say I want to do the sample recorder. And then I want to route this coming from the Rhodes. So now I will take the Rhodes patch. I'm going to set the MIDI to capture both of these. And now at this point, I want to just... We could do auto next. We'll do mapping is going to be as played. So I can just say. And let me just say audio threshold. Let's say I'll just do MIDI note on message and stop as a MIDI note off message. So now. And there are different tutorials on this. Let me just make sure that I have this activate the sidechain, that would help. So, and then at this point, so we had the MIDI note on the mapping as played. And then you're able to kind of just, once you just kind of come here, so just record. And you see that sample shows up right inside of Halligan. And let's say, and I'll come here. Let's say I want my E flat. So you could just activate this record. And so now each of these, when I look at Halligan, will have my different samples that are automatically, that will just be recorded directly here. So we'll go to, we go to the sample mapping, and we could see, all of our different samples that we've recorded here just chromatically across. So that's really all you have to do. So if you have like a favorite sound of a keyboard you're borrowing, just set up a sidechain and set up Halligan to just record. So again, you can just kind of come right over here, click on, and there's kind of like a preset window. So you could just do sample recording, and if you want to do editing as well. But once you have that, you could just activate this. You could capture the MIDI note message and hit the note, and it'll just kind of do the sampling for you. And I created just a MIDI file to play back, the same chromatic notes at like 8 velocity levels. So I could just hit play on a track, and it would capture the MIDI output recording and be able to just sample. But that kind of gives you a quick run through how you could just do your own sampling quite easily. Okay. So question 2, with limited apartment space, monitoring is a concern. I am wondering if you have Waves Abbey Road Studio 3. If so, can that plugin be monitored by client in the VST Pro, maybe the VST Pro Connect session? So you could set it up for that. You could run plugins for that, but it may not be the most ideal situation for like critical monitoring, but you could definitely run the VST3 plugin on that. So, all right. And 3, finally, levels preset to -18 when a track is created. Thank you. Or I think it's probably can levels be set to -18 when a track is created. Thank you for your patience as always. So, when you add tracks, they're going to show up at -0 dB for your volume, but you could add multiple tracks using track presets. So if you wanted to have an audio track, and let's say you want the track preset to be at -18, let me see if we could add multiple of this. So I will go to the fader, and I'll just type in -18. And then if I wanted to save this as a track preset, so we'll save track preset, and I'll just call this -18. So, you could always now add, like when we come over here, I think you could even just say, there's a like add track using track preset. So using track preset here. So let's say if I wanted to go to -18, And let's just say track preset audio. So, and then let's say if I just want to do this multiple times, so then you could do that. So, but a lot of times, we've had a request for people wanting to have tracks at, at a default volume level, but it's going to be defaults to minus, 20 dB, which makes sense. But I could see where it could be useful to, set a default track type. Okay, so when monitoring my integrated LUFS level, it always shows different on Cubase 10.5 mix bus meter than any given plugin on the mix bus, such as Voxengo, Elephant, Ozone. Different. So I'm not sure what would cause the discrepancy. I've heard this from other sources as well. One thing that you could also do, to check is actually, and I've found that the metering is pretty accurate when doing like different analysis. But let's say if I'm here and we have like an audio file and I wanted to look at it with my LUFS meter here. And if I select this same file and look at it in audio statistics, is this way. So we could also just kind of just select the file and here you could see kind of the LUFS level as well. And that's, those are matching what was there. So, and sometimes when depending on where you put the metering plugin in place, but, we have lots of broadcasts that are being done, using the Nuendo meters without any problems, or Cubase meters with that. All right, so Taz H, I want to recreate the Ableton auto filter controlled by LFO in Cubase. Is this possible? So, let's come over here. Let's say if I have this, you could do it. I may have to do some clever routing of some stuff. So let's say if I want to just put on a filter, on this, so I will just say okay, so if you want to just be able to control that, you could set up kind of and I did a whole tutorial on this. I may not have my computer set up to quickly do it, but I will come over here to quick controls and I'm just going to click on the learn function. Okay, so I just want to morph between that. And then let me just see. So I will go to I think I have a project that might be set up specifically for this. I may have to, I'll probably forget how to set up my generic remote for it. So, but I did do in a Q&A series, I did a whole video on this and I'll link it in the comments. Okay, so let me see if I can remember how to do this, but I'll put the link in the video because I'll probably forget how to do it. So we want to send kind of one to go to the IAC bus. Let me see if it's active. So you will need like a MIDI loop. Okay, and let's go to the generic remote. I think it's maybe just a resonance. And I'm just going to check, make sure I have the right parameter. Okay, so adjust the position. Okay. So I'm going to activate the auto alpha here, and I'm going to be sure I'm going to miss the setup on this. And once you do it once, you kind of keep it there. So we're going to say this is going to be transmitting controller 10. But basically what you want to do is to have this trigger and send to the LFO MIDI plugin directly to this control. And then within the generic remote, you could have it done. And there's like one little step. I did a whole video on this if you want to see it. And I'll put the link into the video directly here, how to get it to work with parameters that don't work with like a MIDI learn or a MIDI CC message. Okay, question, can you start and stop recording audio many times while continuously playing in cycle mode? So let's go ahead and give it a try. So we'll have this in cycle mode, and I will come over here and just... So let's say I'm just kind of doing this over and over. And now when I go to my lanes, you'll see all the different passes on different lanes. So it looks like you could do that quite easily with that. So question, hey Greg, should I put the Abbey Road Studio 3 on my master channel or use it in the control room? Thanks. I think a lot of times, the reason that you would use it in the control room, I'm not that familiar with I know generically kind of what the plugin does, but I think it's kind of emulating what Studio 3 and Abbey Road, kind of the room and all that stuff. So, if you're using it for room correction purposes, to try to get your environment to sound like that environment, it would probably make sense to run it in the control room. So if it's kind of for correction, because if you put it in the master bus, if it was intended for correction, trying to make your room sound like Abbey Road, at that point, you'd want it on the control room because you don't want to send the mix out to someone with all the correction applied to it. If it's a plugin and I don't think this is the case, is, going to give you the sound of Abbey Road in your DAW, then you could put on the master bus. So we have a question. Is there a way to randomize MIDI velocities, kind of like Superior Drummer does it? Yeah, there's a number of different ways of doing that. So if you wanted to just, there's logical editor presets for it if you wanted to do that. So let's just jump back to my other project quickly. So if you wanted to take any of the, from the MIDI modifiers, which you may have to right click and enable MIDI modifiers here, you could do this on playback, but once you go to the MIDI modifiers, you could choose to randomize velocity. So you could say, I want to randomize position of notes or velocity between particular values. If we have a number of MIDI parts in, so let's say if I'm here, and you could do that on as an input transformer, but let's say I have all these velocities that are the same, and if I wanted to randomize the velocities, we could go to like the MIDI logical editor. And at this point, we could say we want to take our function and transform. We'll say value 2 of notes. And what we want to do to value 2 is we'll just say, or I'll just come here. We'll say MIDI note messages. I want to set value 2. And you could say set to relative random values between, 80 and 120. So as soon as you hit apply, all the selected notes could just randomize between those different values that you have selected. So there's a couple different ways to do it as well. So very easy. So you could do it in real time with the with the MIDI modifiers, and if you wanted to embed and change those actual values. So I could say I just wanted to randomize velocity here. Let's say 80 and 120. And if you wanted to embed that on the particular track, you could just come over here and say freeze MIDI modifiers, and that could change the velocity values. So there's, 2 or 3 ways of randomizing your velocities. Okay, question from Oren. Hi, Greg. This is Oren. Is spectral layers something different from Cubase, or is it inside of Cubase? Give an example, please. So I know we showed an example of being able to extract the audio, but spectral layers is a separate editor. that Steinberg has kind of taken over distribution for about a year and a half ago. So, and then, to, apply different, components, we could just come over here, and to launch the editor, you go to through an ARA2 interface, and you could just say, let's come over here to spectral layers, and that will just automatically launch spectral layers. And this takes you basically, in essence, into a different editing environment. So, that will, with version 7, allow you to extract voices and unmix stems and have kind of a really, if you want to fix guitar squeaks and different aspects like that, you could do that quite easily with spectral layers. So it's not a part of Cubase, but there's a spectral layers element, and also just a spectral layers 7. So the elements, I think, is around $79 in the US, and prices could vary depending where you're at. And I think the full spectral layers is around $299 in the US and different. Okay, so apparently it's 110 to 114 degrees in Scottsdale, so we'll have to show Pauly D something to cool him down. All right, so. Okay, so question from Pauly D. I only use iLoud MTMs as monitors. So with a single pair, are there features in a control room where I should still use it, or not necessary for a single stereo pair? Control room is great for being able to switch between different monitoring options. But something else that the control room is going to allow you to do is to have kind of a known reference level monitoring source. So, if you're playing back, your mix and everything is, going on here, you could have this, be the monitor level. Instead of using this for the level of your monitor, you could use this, and this doesn't affect the gain structure of the mix. You could also have a known reference point you could dim. So if you want to quickly listen to it at, a specified amount of dB down, and you could set the listen dim amount here. So if you say, okay, I want it to be louder and I want it to dim down, minus 11.3 dBs. So you could listen to it quickly. And also there's different down mix presets, because now, it used to be everyone mixed in stereo, but with so many people listening to phones and, smart speakers, like, maybe like an Amazon Alexa device, you could, that are just kind of like a single source, you may want to make sure that you have your mono compatibility. So, and if you're tracking people, the control room also does, headphone and Q mixes. So even if you have just a single set of stereo speakers, you could, greatly benefit from the control room. Just see a nice comment. Wow, Greg, you're like a neighbor. Thanks for answering my questions. I'm glad it could be helpful. So from Jeweled Lotus. All right. So comment. We have a question from. All right. So from Joey Chesser from Tennessee. Great videos. Thank you. I sent a question a couple days ago. I hope I didn't miss the answer. I'll go back and look after the session. I got here a little late. So we haven't gotten to the user submitted questions. We'll probably get those usually towards the end of the Hangout. So yeah. So, and if you want to, we'll see if you asked your question again. All right. All right. So, because you piqued everyone's curiosity, but yeah, we haven't gotten to the submitted questions yet. All right. Well, Gareth K Music is on. Good to see. I think he missed the last Hangout. So, all right. Okay, so everyone's checking in with Gareth. So it's probably happened 40 minutes ago, an hour ago. All right. Okay. So question from Goran Nordstrom. Hi, is there a way to tone down the rattling sound from the strings when recording an acoustic guitar? The easiest way to do that is, to try to fix it at the source. It's not the answer you always want to hear. And, using different elements like spectral layers, you could go in and take out squeaks quite effectively of guitars. But if it's something that's just constantly going on, if you can't change the guitar, if it's kind of a fixed situation, I would try to fix it, with the microphone. If it has an electronic output, some of them can sound really good. They used to all sound really awful. But a lot of the new ones sound quite nice, and I would maybe try to combine that. But a lot of those things could be fixed with mic position. Like finding maybe, a cheaper mic, sometimes using a dynamic mic can help. But if you're hearing, it's kind of especially if you're doing a lot of, nylon string guitar or steel string where people are kind of shifting up positions, using a tool like the spectral layers to be able to get out. I'll just show quickly here what you could do with it. So I'll just import, I think I have a squeaky guitar file. Okay, so let's say if I have something like this. Like situations like that, this is where spectral layers can really help a lot. So, and again, what spectral layers does is, it's not, like when we edit audio in Cubase, it's editing all of the frequencies. But when we use spectral layers, this allows us to take only particular frequencies that we want to work with. So I'll just make this a little larger here so we could see. And, so we see these kind of high frequencies here. And as we want to kind of zoom in, so you could just kind of grab like an eraser tool, and there's, different ways of kind of selecting, via harmonics, but, the quick, 25-cent version is I could just kind of take out those squeaks often. And, be able to do editing like that. So that's where spectral layers can, make a big difference. If you have to do it, that's obviously kind of taking more of a surgical approach to it. But if you could fix it at the source, that would, be the ideal way to resolve it. And it could be, a different guitar, could be the player. But, while you could do it, it could be a bit tedious to do. Okay, just going through different questions here. So just saying, Paulie D says, I point, to Goran is like, I point my mic to the spot past the bridge between that and the end pin, full acoustic sound, minimal rattle and squeak. So that's a good tip from Paulie. Okay, question. Hi, Greg. Can you please explain what the master track is in relation to SMPTE, etc., film scoring? When you move the project start, sometimes it mentions the master track. So let me just open up kind of like a more of a film scoring type of project. Okay, so when we see people mention SMPTE, SMPTE stands for, the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, and they came up with a standard that is a time code, so that if you were to synchronize two different devices, that there would be a reference. So if you had SMPTE time code that was striped on a tape track in the old days, you could feed that SMPTE time code into a synchronizer, and then you could sync like a MIDI computer or another tape machine now that it had a reference point. So a lot of times when people are working with SMPTE time code, and when we deal with it now, because many people don't synchronize devices, but what we see is the time code. So we could have in Cubase, our time code is represented in different values. So we could have bars and beats. The resolution that Cubase is built upon is a sample resolution. So we could go down to 192,000th of a second. And we could display these different times in different formats. So if I want to see this in bars and beats, we have this set to bars and beats, but I could also see it in seconds. So like the actual time. And then we have SMPTE time code. And you could also see, by samples or 60 frames per second. So with time code, often what you have is hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. So when you have a film project, what it's going to be doing is saying, like in Europe, you have generally, they use 25 frames per second. In the US, they kind of start off as 30 frames a second, meaning that there was 30 pieces of film for every second, or 30 pieces of video for every second. So that's obviously a very coarse resolution compared to audio, which can have up to 192,000 samples per second. So each of those frames is what this number is here. Now, when you get into it, there's also different frame rates, and there's drop frames. So when we get into this, you could get into your project setup by hitting Shift S, and you could actually see the different frame rate options. So sometimes, depending upon the different source and how they have to compensate for this, they'll have different frame rates. So you'll have like 29.97 frames per second. There's also 29.97 drop frames per second. We have, now when we switch to HD, that went to 24 frames, which is generally what film was. So video was generally 30 frames. Film was 24 frames. So when we went back to HD, you now have this, and you have to drop a frame periodically to make it all fit. And that's why we have the 23.98 as your frame rate. So these are all different divisions of how the frames are done. So when we see this also, when in a film scoring context, you may just say, you may just get a list and say, at 49 seconds, 21 frames, I need you to start, the music right at this point. And I need it to, this cue to end at this specific point. Now, when you have two different frames, and as you look at this, and one of the handy things with Cubase is you could actually just kind of move an event and see the event, move based on, once you go to your transport, you could say use video files edit mode. So now I could move an event and see that update as I move the event. But when dealing with the master track, if I want it to have my tempo follow and fit, so if I wanted like an even number of measures, what I could do is just see, I could say I need to start right here at this frame rate. And when we see this is what's called the burn in, like the SMPTE time code burn in. So we could see what the value is here. And if you listen to SMPTE time code, it sounds, very robotic, like, like a machine talking to you. But if I say, at this point, right where we transition to Florian here, the office. So we start here at this moment in time. And then we're going to say, and right where we transition to Florian, I need that to be a certain number of bars. And what Cubase could do is have what's called the time warp tool. So I could say, this bar starts right where we see him talking, and I need this measure to end, at specific time code. So I can say, okay, we're going to move this bar right to Florian, and we could have an even number of bars that will be used between two different areas. So I'll just kind of shut off the move video. So I could just say, okay, we need this right here. I need this bar to go, right at this point. That's where I need, this particular bar. So I'll just undo some of the horrible changes I made. So I say, okay, right here. And then I need an even number of measures to right there. So I need measure 31 to go to right at that specific point. So, while Cubase is doing everything in sample resolution, you could make your bars and beats fit within specified time code ranges. And to do that, you have this master track or the tempo track so that you can map those tempo changes to fit within the specified realm. And how the film and video will be divided will be into this empty time code. And again, you'll see hours, minutes, seconds, frames. And depending where you are, different countries, if you're working with European clients, they're probably going to be dealing with 25 frames a second, so it can be different. And one of the handy features that you have in Cubase is if you hit Shift S, you could actually just choose to get the frame rate from the video automatically. Cubase will do an analysis of what the frame rate is that's in the video file. So you could be working at the same frame rate. So hopefully that's helpful. It could be a little confusing at first, but hopefully that kind of helps. Okay, so we have a question. Is Steinberg maybe planning to have modular blocks applicable to any plugin effects, or all the software architecture will never allow that? I haven't heard of any plans, but again, I'm not always privy, or I'm not always aware of developments that are going on. But I know that there's a lot of people, I don't think it's a software limitation. You could do a tremendous amount kind of, with inserts and sends. But if you wanted to do more, I know that there's like little plugins where you could host, plugins within the plugin to create kind of modular blocks. And I think there's a lot of freeware, shareware ones. So at that point, it may not be as applicable if it's something that's so kind of readily available, but I'll pass on kind of, the desire for that. Okay. All right, so just kind of go on. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. If you've learned something new, make sure that you, hit the like button, and that if you haven't subscribed to the channel, that you feel free to go ahead and do that quickly. So a question, I'm having problems with a third-party plugin and they're working with me on it, but I'm afraid they're going to ask me to trash my Nuendo preferences. Is there a way to globally save preferences? So all you have to do is go to the edit menu and just go to your profile manager. And at this point, you could just simply, come right over here and export your profile. And then that would contain all of your preferences. And you could just simply, go back and restore all the preferences the way you want to as well. So just go to your edit menu to profile manager. Okay, so I see John, who's a clarification of previous question in very audio. I'm referring to the segment start and end without warping. This is strictly pitch correction scenario, no warping. So I think, let me just jump back to that particular project and activate it. And let me just see if there's just seeing if there's a lock. I mean, a lot of times if you are just doing mostly, you're editing, if you don't really kind of, go to the edges as much, I mean, it's only if you do that particular thing, but I'm just seeing if there's a way to maybe lock position. Yeah, so I'm not seeing kind of I know in some of the, let's see if I come here and if I choose to lock the position, let's say and size, if now when we go into very audio, if that has an effect. No, it doesn't. So, it's only going to change if you actually, do that particular function. But I can see how maybe, if it's something that you're kind of doing accidentally all the time. But, if you just, it's only going to happen if you actually do it. So it's probably not the answer you want to hear, but, all right, so we'll move on. Okay, so a question. Hi from Austria. I just upgraded from 10.5 elements to artist and even switched to better hardware, new Mac Mini, i7, 16 gigs of RAM. Now I have problems with the audio performance. Cubase stucks very often. So, check to see if you're running into this with third-party plugins. And if you just went to a new system, and you have older plugins, a lot of third-party plugins, if you're running Catalina, may not work well or be optimized really for Catalina. So, check and make sure that, it's not, if you do it with a lot of, a lot of third-party components, or if it's just stock components, and see if you get isolated. But a lot of times, when stuff is getting stuck, and, it may be like when you restart Cubase 10.5 that you get like the little screen again, and that may give you a clue as to what is causing the issue. Okay. All right, moving on. Okay, so Greg, what would happen if you just randomly drew and painted all over the spectral layers? So, a lot of the tools are for, I'm not a spectral layers expert, but I think a lot of the tools are more designed for selection and filtering as opposed to kind of adding in. So, you could do a lot of very creative things in spectral layers, but, I don't think it's randomly going to draw in frequencies. There's probably a way to do it, but generally when I use it, and you could unmix components where you could take kind of the tonal layer and a transient layer of different sounds. But I haven't used it in that way. Okay, so I see P. Stevens. Hold on, are you doing that from one stereo file? And this is probably with the spectral layers. So yes. So you're just kind of taking that and taking a stereo file and unmixing it. So, and the next comment below is spectral layers equals voodoo. Yeah, it's pretty frightening what you could do. So. Okay, so just seeing from EH Kikana. Oh, wow, first time hangout. I've learned a lot so far. So if you've done that, make sure you hit the like button and that you subscribe to the channel. And that way, as new hangouts are announced, you could get notified. And we've been doing these kind of since the pandemic started every Tuesday and Friday, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern time in the US. Okay. Okay, so I see. Hi, all. Question: can we have the option to color code different markers and have the option to extend a vertical line from a marker spanning an entire vertical range? So you can color code markers differently. So let's say if I have, like in this project, there are several markers. I think I could colorize them independently. So if I wanted to just make that particular marker yellow, and let's say I wanted the choruses to be yellow, I could come here and just say, okay, I want this marker to be yellow, and I want the bridge always feels very green to me. You could, do stuff like that as well. So each marker could have a global color. Each marker could have its own independent color. And so, and do we have the option to extend a vertical line from a marker spanning the entire vertical range? So I don't think it's going to do that. And that could be, where you want to see like this kind of maybe in the background, all one color and a different range. So I don't know a way to do that. I think the background is going to be kind of constant, but each marker can be independently, independently colored. Okay. Just go on reading through different questions. Okay. Okay, so let's see, maybe under the project. So this is about the set time at editor. So we talked about this. So set time at cursor under the project drop down. So let me just see if I could. Just taking a quick look here. Let me just look under maybe the edit menu. Make sure I'm not just reading over it. Look in the edit menu quickly, just see if it's there, or maybe I thought it might be in the transport. But if not, I'll take a look and we could go over it on Friday. Sorry for being obtuse about it today. Okay, reading through comments. Okay, so I'm just reading 4. So he says third from bottom. Okay, set time code at cursor. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this. To new project, and I'll just make sure I don't have. All right, so I'm going to open up just a quick ruler track and set that to time. Okay, so let's say I go to 50 seconds and I will set time code at cursor. So let's say I want that to be 0, 0, 0. Okay, so now we have our negative values. And let me see if I could go back to the original question, if I could scroll back without losing everything. Do it in another feed. So I think the question was, and now if we do a negative, set it to negative 2-bar offset. So we'll do 2 measure offset here. So I'll just say. So let's say if I started at, so I'll go to my project setup again. I'll set this to 0. Okay, so right now we're at 26.1.1. And then if I set a -2-bar offset, or and then if you also wanted to come, let's see, but if you could, if while you're there, you could also figure out, if you wanted that to be measure 0 as well. So let's say if I come here and we have this set like so, and I want it like this time to be 0 in seconds, and I wanted the offset, so we're at 26.1.1. And now if I come over here, you could just set the display bar offset to -26. Or to 26. Then you could have that start right at 0, 0. So, but maybe if you could we'll try to catch it before the end of the Hangout, or if you want to send a quick email to clubcubase@steinberg.de, that'd be helpful. So. All right, so let's move on. So question 2, will mapping controllers to VSTs be made a lot more easy and intuitive? Quick controls really aren't intuitive. I think this is the worst part of Cubase compared to competition. So I think it's pretty straightforward, so if I have my VSTs here, so it's, add an instrument track, and I'll just go to, once you have it set up once, so I could come over here, and I think on my quick controls, I'll just set it up once. I'll go to my, VST quick controls, and I will just kind of move my faders. And just make sure that this is being learned. So I'll just say we're going for my nectar. So I set this up once only. So I move a slider and I just had to learn enabled. So I will just come here, learn, move a slider, learn, move a slider. And it's capturing it. Okay, and then any of the parameters that you want, so you could just go to, your quick controls just right there. You could save those as presets. You could also, so that's pretty straightforward. So I'm sure that they'll be working on some stuff to make it more intuitive for different controllers. But once you have those set up, and you could always just right click and just assign a particular parameter to a set quick control. So that's really, any of the parameters, you could assign and just be working just like that. So, okay, so question with generic mode. So say I do pick bank 3 on MPD 218. The 16 pad notes are from 68 G sharp 4 to 80 G sharp 5. If I assign G sharp 4 function copy, will it be triggered if I draw in the MIDI note in the editor? No. So when you draw the note in the editor, that doesn't have anything to do with the input controllers. So what that's going to do is that's going to send that particular MIDI note to wherever the to wherever the track is being routed. So it's not going to send it to the generic remote. So it's really what the MPD is transmitting to this, is being set to assign. So those MIDI notes will be kind of globally extracted for the generic remote. And the other notes can be transmitted directly to the tracks. But so just drawing in a note that is being set to transmit to a note. And again, that MIDI note message is that input port and that note on that channel. So at that point, that's all that it's going to be taking. So it's going to be broken down by note, channel, and port. Whereas this, once you have a VST instrument or another instrument, it's probably going to be on a different port as well. So you could draw this in, and that's not going to trigger that particular function that's going to play that note on that particular track for you. And sorry, let me find my phone and get it turned off. Sorry about that. Just turn the volume down on my phone. It was hiding. Okay. Okay, reading on through more comments. So Pinder's just sorry about the generic remote questions, a bit confused. So once you kind of get it set up, it'll become, fairly second nature. So. Okay, so we have a question. How to insert silence in an audio track. Example, after I bounce and I want the start of the audio to be at the start of the timeline. Says I want the start of the audio to be at the start of the timeline. So let's say if you have, let's say just kind of a, let's say drum loop here. You could, if you, so it says, so after I bounce and want the start of the audio to be at the start of the timeline. So if you wanted to insert silence on the time track, you could, if you're in kind of the combined mode here, we'll activate. I'll just make this a little larger so it's a little more obvious. You could select a range here. So let's say 2 bars. And if you go to edit to range and choose insert silence, that will kind of just bump the audio out. So I'll undo that. So whatever range that I have selected here, I could just do that and do that function, and that kind of knocks off. So that inserts the silence. So it says, so that's how to insert silence in an audio track. But it says, after I bounce and I want the start of the audio to be at the start of the timeline. So, what you could do is if you have this, and let's say our timeline is here and we see our audio file. If I just move the cursor to the beginning, I could just come here to the edit and we could choose just to move to cursor. That would move it to the beginning of the timeline. So if you just hit, like your 0 key on your numeric keypad, multiple times, or just hit the period key, that'll take you to the beginning of the project. And now if you needed to update the timestamp of that audio file, you could go to audio and choose update origin. So right from there. So if that had, timestamp information, but so it seems like, I don't know, if you're inserting silence that you can move it over, but that's kind of seems different than moving it to the file. So hopefully one of those two things will do the trick. Okay, let me just, my timeline just jumped in the chat field. Let me just rewind. Okay, so in our comment from Pinder, I guess I can't get my head around why we can assign MIDI keys to functions when we need them to trigger the notes. So it's, you don't have to assign MIDI keys to it, but a lot of, you can use MIDI, you can use any MIDI message, and it could be keys, it could be faders, sliders. So, and if you have a separate controller, so a lot of people may have 49 key controller, and they may have started with a 25 key controller. And since that's on a different MIDI port, you could just dedicate that to a particular, just to functions if you want to. You don't have to. So, I would keep one if you want to use that just for your MIDI controller, you could do that. And, if you wanted to assign, because a lot of controllers, as soon as you hit a button, that's transmitting a MIDI message. And if it's transmitting a MIDI message that you could see in the MIDI monitor plugin under MIDI inserts, then that is acceptable. That it can be used just as well. So, okay, so I have a question. Hello, Greg. How can I export MIDI loops? Okay, so all you have to do if you have a MIDI part, so let's say if I come here and I'm in Retrolog, and let's say if I just have, you just find a quick patch here, so. So at this point, I'll just do something without. So if I've recorded something that's being routed to a VST instrument on an instrument track, so I come here. So at that point, if I wanted to export that as a MIDI loop, so a MIDI loop is different than a MIDI file in that a MIDI loop actually recalls the information of the state of the instrument and what instrument is being used, whereas a MIDI file is just kind of a bit generic and it can be played back with anything. So if I come here, I'll just choose to go to export MIDI loop. And then you could just kind of give it a name. So say August 11, hit OK. And then when you go to import MIDI loops, you could just kind of come right over here, say, okay, I just want to go to user presets and think, let me just come over here to loops. Or I may have to just go to the browser. So, and then you'll be able to just kind of have access to all of your different MIDI loops here. So you can say, okay, here's August 11th. I drag that over. That will load up the instrument and play back everything exactly as we left it. So once you have that all configured, just come over here to export to MIDI loop. All right, we get good to see Terry Dean on the Hangout. Okay, so we have a question from or comment from Nicholas Calixty or Clixt. Tempo mapping, please. So I can show you how to do this. Okay, so, you know, if you have the Cubase Pro and you have a track that's not mapped to tempo, like this one, all I have to do is just to select, and I can do this with MIDI or audio parts, select it, go to your project menu, and choose tempo detection. And at this point, it'll do an analysis of the file, the recording. And then you'll have some adjustments, like if you wanted to, you know, divide by 2. And let's say you want to do like offbeat correction. So, you know, you could do it that way. You could also just kind of do, you know, manually. So there, it's just automatically done the tempo detection for you. And it'll place the meter in 1/4. So if I want to close that out, and when we do this, it also places it into time warp. So if I needed to manually adjust, we could do that. But now when I do we can say that's our downbeat here, and just listen. And now we have the tempo map of the actual material. So that's really all you have to do, whether it's the same principle for MIDI part or for audio. Okay. All right, so just reading through. reading through different comments. All right, so we have Dave checking in from Kingston, New York. Lots of heat waves in different parts of the world. Okay, so, and, just maybe going back to kind of our previous question. So let's say I did the tempo mapping here, and let's say if I wanted this all to be a steady tempo now, I could go to, we had a question how to go from like 75 to 80 over a number of bars. So I will come here and I'll make this into like a steady tempo. So I'll say set definition from tempo. And this is going to apply all the metadata of the tempo changes into the project. So I will come here, I'll just do a new track version for tempo. So let's say I gradually wanted this to go from, 120 to, and again, we click here and say ramp. So at this point, I could just, go over a number of bars, and I wanted to just gradually ramp up. Now my track will just... and we'll just kind of gradually speed up. So just make sure that you have this set to from jump to ramp. Then you could just draw in ramp changes that will, go slightly, from 5 beats a minute faster over, whatever time you kind of drop it in. And it's gradually speeding up. And now we're at kind of our new tempo. So that's really all you have to do is kind of just use the ramp mode with your tempo. So question, is there any particular tutorial that you could recommend for me go to learning Cubase 10.5 elements? A lot of the, there's, I think I just looked before the Hangout that, on just the Cubase YouTube channel, there's 436, tutorials. So, figure out what instead of trying to, what I would suggest is maybe figure out what you want to do. It's like, I want to be better at MIDI editing. I'm confused on tempo track, and then look for a tutorial on that. And a lot of them will be for the Cubase Pro version, but a lot of the principles will be, can be very similar. So I would maybe take that as an approach. So. Okay. So I see Nicholas is now, probably a while ago, saw the ramp mode. So I think he's all good. Okay. So I see Ace is on a Hangout that posted this question before the Hangout started, but I don't think I caught the question from the Hangout that you posted earlier. So let's see. Okay, so he was kind enough to do it. So, hi Greg, hope you and your family are doing well and staying safe. I'm thinking of purchasing Iconica, but it's 60 gig. Is there a way to download large Steinberg products in parts or zips? So I think if you go to the Steinberg library, the download manager, let me say, or the Steinberg download assistant. So as soon as you come here, it is a large library, but when we go to Iconica, I think it's going to be broken up. So let's go to VST Instruments, and So let's go to Iconica. So when we go to, let's say, the Iconica, you'll see that you'll have like it broken down into strings, woodwinds, brass. So it's that way it's not all like one monster download. It's going to, kill your internet if you have kind of bad internet connection. So once you kind of come here, you could just say, okay, I want it to, some of them, will be broken down to, different components for you. Okay, just reading through different questions. Okay, just seeing Ace's comments. Last time I downloaded Halion 6, it took a day and a half to download. Is there a way to download large Steinberg products and parts or zips? So, when you do download, when it is that, it is zipped. So, it's just a tremendous amount of content that comes with it. But as you saw, often you could download different things. So question, is there a way to customize the way that overlapping MIDI events are displayed in the key editor? Example, I can't see how to make everything visible connected as if it's all one event. Thanks so much. So let me just jump back to this and so let's say if we have a bunch of, let's say my 21st century composition here, and I have this kind of like different parts. So what I do often is just select the track and then launch the editor from there. And then, as soon as you want to do editing for different parts on the same track, you just kind of click and that will activate it. So I do this just by, or just kind of selecting, the different parts. Let's see if I hold down shift, if it'll all show up in the lower zone. So, what I do is I just have the key command for this. So I have the key command set in preferences. And I think this is kind of what you want to do. So if you go to preferences to editors, I have the key when, double clicking, but open editor with key command. With the open editor commands, opens into a separate window. So this way I select the track and I just hit Control or Command E. And then I can see all the different elements on the track and all the different parts that are on that track. So I see if that makes sense. If that's not what you want, just let me know. Hi, Greg and everyone. How to reduce noise in Cubase LE 9.5. Is there any way? So I'm not sure if it's noise that's been recorded. So, if you have like maybe you ran your mic pre too hot and you hear like a constant kind of going on, there's plugins to do that. What some people will do is kind of, take a different, part of the plugin, see if you could isolate the noise, and then, some people will invert the phase of, find just the noise itself and then invert the phase of, and copy that to a different track, and then maybe, invert the phase of that and try to cancel out some of the noise. But that's if you have it, if you have a tool like spectral layers, you could actually, very effectively find a noise, you could generate kind of your own noise signature and, kind of a, and it's not global. So it's just kind of a, a selected noise signature, particular frequencies that you see. and then you're able to take that and be able to extract it, but nothing that's built into LE 9.5. So I just see a comment from Nicholson. I hope Greg uses titles after this webinar so we could jump to which section we need. So generally, all the, I kind of painstakingly go through, usually, after doing a 4-hour hangout, I'll take a little bit of a break, have dinner with my family, and then I annoy them and come down and spend another 3 hours doing an index. So we generally, if you look at the first comment of each of the hangouts, and I think we've done like 43 since March, every one of them is indexed with topic and a timestamp, so you could read a question and click on the timestamp, and I'll take you right to that particular point to see that particular question that was discussed. So. Okay, question from Greg Nicolette. Is it possible to enter a tempo change with the key command so that the tempo change point is created in a tempo track in one key command? So I think it's maybe a Shift T. Let me just try it here. I'll just add a quick tempo track. Let me find the key command. It might be insert tempo. Okay, so if I'm here, then I hit Shift T, and let's say I want it to be 100. And let me just see if there's a, so that's kind of global, but let me just see if I can. Let me just look at tempo and see if there's a. So I don't know. There's probably a way to do it. So let's say if I have my tempo value of 100 to start with here. Let's just say if I'm here and I have my tempo value, I go here, I hit Shift T, and let's just say there's probably a way to just, there may be a way to accomplish this with the macro, or let me just see if there's something in the project logical editor. It's probably something really easy that I'm just missing. Let me just. But if you have the value selected here and that point selected, you could hit Shift T and then say 122. as you enter, so you'd enter that in, and then let's say 132. So, but I'll play around with that and see if I could have a solution for the next Hangout. So, great question. Thanks for that. So you comment on the index. One day Greg's son will do it. So that'd be nice. Yeah. I'm gonna see if I get him to pick up his Legos first. Then he could conquer doing the index. But he often hangs out with me and works on puzzles while I do it. So I'll train him as my replacement when I retire. Question, how did you change the size of fonts in the mixer? I see you even have 2 lines. So with the latest versions, I think 10.5 added the ability in the mix console to, it used to be on Mac, it did it, but on PC, it was, it was, hang on just one second. All right, my son made a little necklace of glow sticks for me. So, all right, so let's go back. We're getting back to this. So I think it's 10.5 that it was changed on a Windows platform so that you could see 2 lines on this particular one in the mix console. So, but it's not. I don't think it's a user adjustable with that. But if you just kind of keep typing here, when giving it a name, it will go for, 2 rows. All right, so I have my revelation for drunken trumpet sounds in Hallian. So for Gareth, my mission is complete. Okay, and if you've learned a new tip or trick, make sure that you actually hit the thumbs up button and that you subscribe to the channel. Okay. It's going on through different questions. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to copy an insert from one track to multiple tracks? Tried quick link, doesn't seem to work. So let's give it a shot. I think it's to one track at a time, but we'll see if we can figure something out. So come here, let's get to the inserts. Okay, so just holding down the Alt key can do that. And let's say, okay, so I'll try selecting. And if I put these in a link, and let's see if I link the inserts, if that makes a difference. Yeah, so it looks like one track at a time, unfortunately. So, but I can see where that could be helpful. Okay, reading through comments. Thanks for all the great discussions. Okay, so we have a question. Hi from, I'm probably going to say this, from Florida. Zephyrillis, or Zephyr Hills, Florida. What's the best way to trigger MIDI drum performance with Groove Agent sounds? So you could use, so I will just kind of come over here. So any, MIDI controller will work, and you could, trigger patterns with different MIDI notes. Let me just switch octaves. If you have an electronic drum kit, one of the things that people miss is they want to do mapping easily of their different sources. You could click on this little icon just below the bottom right corner pad. And this will, once that is enabled, you could right click and just do a learn trigger note. Without that on, it'll be kind of fixed. But with this enabled, you could learn the trigger note, and that way you could easily map your, your MIDI drum controller or keyboard controller or drum pads on a MIDI keyboard to play back particular sounds that you want if they're not lined up, as you would like them to be. Okay. Just seeing comment from Gareth Full. Hallion seems pretty powerful. And currently the Hallion is on sale too. So if you're interested in sampling and making your own instruments, it's a great time to take advantage of it with some of the other instruments that are currently on promotion. All right. I'm going to blow off a call from Beyonce's road manager for you guys. All right. All right, so just keep going on. All right, so it says, hi Greg, question. There's an issue with the chord track after selecting and triggering a track when the chord is selected, and when I mute the chord track, it stays active for one shot, then gets muted. Let's go ahead and give a shot at this. I'll just revert this quickly. Okay, so let's say so after selecting triggering a track, when chord is selected and when I mute the chord track, it stays active for one shot and then gets muted. So let's say my chord track is triggering my Rhodes here. So after selecting a triggering track, so let's say I selected my Rhodes, and when chord track is selected, and when I mute the chord track, it stays active for one shot, then gets muted. So let's see if this... So one thing you may want to try is in the chord track here. So try, I'm not sure if I'm understanding the exact question, but try to just within a chord track, and it could be instead of muting that you have the acoustic feedback, you may want to just turn the acoustic feedback on and off here and see if that kind of does what you want to. and let me know. All right, just seeing a nice comment from Gareth. It says I've only used probably with the Hallian. I've only used Hallian Sonic SE, and more so recently, these Hangouts have shown me how great the included plugins instruments are now. I've learned a lot in the past few months, despite having Cubase for decades. Yeah, so that's always a great thing. And, I find the need for using a lot of third-party solutions not, as relevant in productions anymore. So, okay. And I see Michael Teams says, if you're new at the Hangout, make sure you subscribe and whack that like button. I won't disagree. So, okay. So I see Miller just passing on. It says, awesome tutorial on the Hallian sampler with the title, Sample Recorder, New Features in Hallian 6. So check that out. Gareth is also mentioning that the multi-tap delay has a ton of features he didn't know about. That's probably so that's probably like the most powerful delay plugin I've ever seen. So question 3 from Tim Live: workspaces don't work consistently on dual or triple monitor setups. Will this be addressed anytime soon? And so I use workspaces pretty consistently. I have a dual monitor setup in my studio, and I haven't run into any particular issues. But if you have files that you could send me, maybe a project file that you could share where it's misbehaving, I'd be glad to take a look at it, and you could share that to clubcubase@steinberg.de. And if you could put like maybe an email address, then I could respond offline to you. But I haven't really had any problems with, and I have a friend in Nashville, I think has, I think 9 screens, and he uses workspaces pretty extensively as well. So, but let me know if you have a particular project. And I see someone else has run into it and filed it. So, and Gareth is also saying his workspaces work fine on 2 monitors. Okay, question, Cubase Pro 10.5, is there a maximum of effects to use in one production? Sometimes I cannot edit some of the effects on a track anymore. It stays gray. So when you see this, it's often because this little icon in the lower left-hand corner is turned on, called constrained delay compensation. So when you see this orange here, and what this allows you to do is to be able to record and play virtual instruments by bypassing kind of plugins that have a lot of latency. So if I wanted to come to, let's say on my master bus, if I had a multi-band compressor and another one, let's say I just had under modulation, like a cloner that has some pretty good latency, I think, for what it does. So these plugins can cause a lot of latency, and you could actually see what latency is being caused by the particular plugins when you go to like the full screen mix console. And if you wanted to see it, you can go to the little setup window here. And as you do this, you could say, I want to see channel latency. So just adding those 2 plugins adds, 252.3 milliseconds of latency. So the multi-band compressor is 123 and 129.3 for cloner plugin. So when we have these plugins turned on, and we have the constrained delay compensation active, now we can't really do anything with those particular plugins because there's a preference set up. I think this is under VST, of over how many milliseconds does the constrained delay compensation threshold for recording. So you could adjust that. So probably all you need to do is just deactivate the constrained delay compensation. So once that is deactivated, all the plugins are active. If you want to track and play virtual instruments without it getting completely feeling like a badly dubbed movie, you could just simply, turn on the constrained delay compensation. It's going to bypass those plugins and then re-enable it. And then it'll just simply turn it back on and off. So just try doing that. I think that will do the trick for you. So question number 4, if you have many quantized presets, you can't reach or see them all since there aren't any folders in a list of presets that spans your entire screen. I think this should be solved. I agree with you, and I've discussed that with some of the product planning people. So I've kind of passed that along because I've run into the same thing. So maybe we'll see a resolution in the future where you could save it to a particular folder. So, okay. Okay, some discussion on workspaces. Okay, so we have a question from Tanmay. Can someone tell me how to place the playhead on the selected position when clicked on a MIDI or audio event clip instead of clicking on the timeline bar without pressing the shift modifier key? So let's say if I just want to click here, and let me just adjust and we want the playhead position. So say I'm here, and let's see if it's maybe an editing preference. Okay, just kind of reading through. Okay, so let's say if we just open up another project that has some more events quickly. So let's just say if I So I think, if you hold down Alt Shift, you can click anywhere. I think sometimes when you click on and edit, let me just see if there's a and I know anywhere that you click, you could, if you hold down Alt Shift, you could click the playhead position anywhere you want. But I think this is like a really simple thing I'm just missing and forgetting. But let me just see if it's a transport command. So, but I seem to remember like, sometimes like double clicking and the playhead going to that position. Let me just, it doesn't seem like that's behaving how I remembered, but you could always just Alt Shift and jump the, playhead position anywhere you want. Okay, so question: when auditioning loops in the media bay, the align beats function isn't always available with every loop. Why? I think a lot of it has to be if there isn't, like depending on the tempo information, if some of the metadata isn't in the beats, that it may not be able to align the beats. So. All right, good to see Ambient Dave on a hangout. All right. Sorry he's not feeling well. Okay, so how to set up default track volume for all tracks existing and newly added. For example, I want all my tracks to have a default volume of minus 4 dB. So there isn't a way to do it by default, but we had that question earlier, so I'll pass along kind of the desire for that. All right, we all hope that Ambient Dave is feeling better soon. All right. Okay, just reading through different comments. Okay, some more discussion on the Waves Abbey Road plugin. All right, so we had a question again about the modular blocks. So, and I think it's the third time questions come up. So if we could just try to avoid repeating the questions. Sorry, I said the trigger keyword for the Amazon speaker. So, and didn't mean to trigger everyone's smart speaker. So. Okay. Okay, so just kind of reading through more comments and questions. And someone else, John Wells, pointing out that sometimes rubbing a little soap rubbed on guitar strings can help lessen squeaks. Sometimes, particular guitars, different brands or different types of guitar strings could be more squeaky than others as well. Okay, reading through. All right, so we have Mixboy2105 checking in from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. First time watching the live stream. Welcome. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And give a thumbs up if you've learned something new. Hope to see you on future Hangouts. Okay. Just lots of great comments going on. Hello, Greg. Is the version of spectral layers you're using elements? Thank you. The elements, the one I have is the full version of spectral layers. That will do the unmixing. But if you wanted to extract the vocal, I'm pretty sure that's in the elements version as well. So if you wanted to just extract a vocal from a song, you could do that with the elements, which is kind of very nice of them to do. So just see a question, how to change the Cubase record button color to dark red, just in case that's not red enough for you. I don't think it's changeable, but I'll take a quick look in some of the preferences under user interface stuff. But I don't think we gets into like individual buttons per se of that. So yeah, I think that's kind of fixed. So I'm sure like our guy or the person that has done the development for the color, found the right, engineering shade of red to actually go through and do research on stuff like that. Okay, so just see Fran says, I just jumping in. Hi, everybody. What is it about today? So, in general, we always just kind of do, just take questions from anyone. So it's just a live interactive Q&A. Okay, so someone's asking, please show your workspace color setup. So I'll come over here to preferences and so my color schemes, and I think these are all default. So for the workspace, so for like the background, I think it's going to be just the project area background here. So just have that set to auto. Okay. All right. Just moving on. So see question. Hello. Cubase 10.5 bug with articulation maps. It randomly switches to first articulation in list. It works fine in version 10. How to fix it? I had that happen periodically in like previous ones. And I think what some people do, and I'll just pull up a project that has some articulations mapped in it. So let me just make sure I have the right one. So, as soon as I come here, like, when I have the articulations, I know some people will change, I think, something that they do, they find it consistently. So I haven't had it really happen in 10.5 to me, but when you go to the expression map setup, I know that's depending on the instrument itself, like sometimes it will, re-trigger the very first articulation, and some people will just kind of take an expression map and put just kind of like just an empty thing at the very top, and they've had that do it. But let me know if it's only for a particular library or every single library is doing it. And let me see if he just... Yeah, so I've had it happen with some instruments in the past, and I think some people would just put like a blank thing at the very top, and then it would recall the expression correctly. So there's a question: any path to upgrade from 9.5? Yeah, you could definitely upgrade to to 10 and 10.5. So you could just go to the Steinberg online shop and be able to do that very easily. You could use your same key, your Cubase 9.5 version. And keep your 10.5 as well. All right, my chat line just jumped way ahead. Bear with me. Okay, so please someone help. I don't know why, but my playhead always sticks to selected event. So try, we go to... So it's probably when you do this, and if you select the event and the playhead just jumps to that particular event, it's probably because you have transport, use video follows edit mode. So if you uncheck that, now when you click, your playhead position will remain. But while that is checked, it will jump to the beginning of the selected event for you. So to stop that behavior, transport, use video follows edit mode, uncheck that. Okay. Okay, just reading. So can you help me with chopping hi-hats and panning them in less steps, or some shortcuts for panning automation? So, all right, so let's come back. Let me jump back to another project. So a lot of times when you do panning of hi-hats, it could be a little tricky because a lot of times if it's on its own track and its own MIDI channel, it could, that way, it may have some different elements. So let's say if I wanted to come to, I'll just go ahead and create a quick drum map from this. But, one of the cool things you could do, and I'll see if, all right, so I'll just put this on maybe eighth notes. Okay, so I will just come here and paint in some hi-hats, and I think I have just my delay on my mix console causing all sorts of... Okay, so let's just jump back to here. Okay, so when you're doing stuff in, if you wanted to do different hi-hats, you could do MIDI panning. So if you wanted to come here, let's see if it's... Not all drum machines will do this. So let's say if I just come here to pan. And if you have kind of like a pattern like this, you could just come here and just select it and just hit Command D, and we'll see if this. So that's, one fairly easy way if you wanted to just take, we'll just solo just the hi-hats here. So, and again, all I did was just kind of take so I just went in the drum editor and just went to pan and just kind of draw in like 2 sections like this. And then all I had to do is select those, and I just hit Command or Control D to duplicate, and you could just kind of duplicate that pattern if you wanted to. Just, it's all kind of the same. So let me just undo that, make it a little longer so we could have the events on different. So then it's just MIDI. Let me just alternate it a little more here. Sorry. Just take off my snap, but so say you want this one, and again, just select, and then you'll just hear the hi-hat panned just like that. So you can do it with just basic MIDI, CC messages that could be easily copied and pasted around. And so if you want to chop them in fewer steps, it's not too bad. Okay, so, and there's also comments about like the different drawing tools, how to access the parabola. So you have a drawing tool in any of the MIDI editors. And then just clicking here, you could also just switch to different drawing tools. So if you want to have a parabola, now as you enter in, you could just enter in via parabola, or if you want to do sine wave. So if you just kind of click and hold down, you could have a triangle wave or square wave, and this would probably be even faster. So if I just select like a square wave, and then you can hold down the shift key and just kind of draw in different frequencies of that and be able to, just kind of be able to draw in. Let me just. So, but yeah, there's a number of ways of just being able to draw in CCs and use some of the, extended line tools for different shapes if necessary. Okay, so the master track is if we have a project, and it's called the tempo track in Cubase. Other programs call it master track. But if we have a tempo track that has different tempo changes, and so if I wanted to come here and I wanted the project to speed up and slow down, sometimes people will also assume like a master track would have a signature track associated with it. So, but they're kind of broken down into 2 different components. So if I want it to go from 3/4 to 4/4 to 7/8, whatever, you could just have different signature tracks and different tempo tracks. So some programs they'll be kind of tied together, but in Cubase they're 2 separate track. So that's often what people would consider like a master track. So I just see a question, does he read these messages on YouTube? So, I'm following the chat live, but as we do that, we also are, if you leave a comment in the YouTube comments after the live hangout, we often try to catch those as well. I mean, I go back like weeks and weeks, but usually within a few days between the hangouts, I'll check. All right, so Gareth has sanitized the like button for everyone, so you can feel free to hit it. All right. Okay. So, hi, Greg. Is there an advantage or disadvantage in connecting the Steinberg Mid-X8 into an USB 3 versus a USB 2? Better latency or more consistent timing, maybe? No, there's not going to be really advantage. That interface was actually written, I think, for USB 1. And it has its own kind of buffer for MIDI timing. So there's no real, for the bandwidth of the information that's being sent out. And you figure that, MIDI itself is at 32K. So, that's, 32 baud, so it's like if we think back to like what a 56K modem was 30 years ago, MIDI is well below that. So the bandwidth of what it's transmitting is not, doesn't come anywhere near the bandwidth for USB 2 or 3. So there's no benefit. I still have 2 Mid-X8s in my home studio. All right. So a problem with the download system is the size of the files. So question or comment on this that need downloading again because they fail sometimes. Downloading 21 gigabyte multiple times is not ideal. But on the other hand, it's not ideal, obviously. But, we have a lot of support calls that come in when people don't have a full download and install just components and not other components. And then, people get upset with us. So you could, so it goes both ways with that. So, all right. Just seeing a nice comment from Agent K. Greg is the master of 21st century compositions. So yeah, drawing in randomly with my mouse. I remember one time I get to hang out with Sidney Harmon's son of Harman Kardon, who, the founder of Harman Kardon and owner of JBL and, Soundcraft and Lexicon and Crown. And his son was getting into Cubase, and I went over and kind of babysat with him for a couple of days at his house. And his son was, was probably like 8 or 9, and he would just, randomly draw in, with the paintbrush tool in Cubase, just randomly kind of draw in compositions, and I would have to sit there for a couple of hours as he would just kind of just grab a paintbrush and draw stuff in. So he was probably, but that was the 20th century, end of the 20th century. So so I could compete with Daniel Harmon. So just seeing comments. I'm the milk. So it's kind of an inside joke between Pablo and Gareth. And Gareth does a great job kind of moderating for us when I can't be on top in real time. Okay. So, see a comment. My son is already soaking up all your knowledge. Greg, he's going to be a superhero when it comes to DAWs. He'll be the dog keeper. So, hopefully, if he likes it, he could maybe take over for me. But I'll let him do whatever he wants to. So, okay. Okay, reading through comments. Thanks for all the great comments. No need to apologize for silliness in comments. We're here to help you guys out. Agent K is also pointing out, just I know we mentioned it before with some of the Hallian questions that that there is, the Cubase summer instrument sale going on. So if you want Hallian, some of the other instruments, it's a great time to kind of check it out. So a question from Robbie Bowling. Good to see you on a hangout, Robbie. Is it fair to say that Spectral Layers is similar to Isotope RX? They both kind of take this similar approach and do a lot of spectral based editing, like frequency dependent editing. So you'd use them for different tasks. And sometimes they will, I'm not an RX7 expert by any means, but I think like kind of especially with version 7 in Spectral Layers, like the AI modes for kind of selection of different components and being able to select harmonics, I think is unique, but I'm not totally sure, but it's similar concept. Okay, so Greg, why every time I load Cubase 10.5, it goes through every file on my computer? Also, why VST effects I have that are compatible, not allowed? How do I fix this? So a lot of times when it goes through as it's going through the plugin sort of first time, and why it's scanning it is I think it's taking like a measurement of the latency of the plugin to make sure that the delay compensation is accurate. But when you get to the VST plugin manager, you may also have a blacklisted plugin. And a blacklist I'm sorry, they changed the terminology to block list. And this is a list of plugins that are blocked because they cause system instability. So even if it is a VST3 plugin, it's 64-bit, the plugin could still be causing system instability that's going to crash your computer. And that's why they're often put onto the block list. So, it's not that it's just, it's compatible. It's that plugin is causing system instability. So that's why it gets placed onto the block list. And as you do that, you can manually remove it from the block list, but, realize that it was probably placed on the block list for a reason. So at that point, if it crashes, you probably have a pretty good idea what the culprit is. And sometimes it's like, like little freeware plugins that you get from, some high school kid works great. And then like a really well-respected company, their plugin may fail, and it's just how it is. So, it's not, so if you wanted to manually undo it, you can, but, just beware. It's kind of like, proceed at your own risk. Okay. Greetings. Is it possible to have a meter same as the main master one, but only for the input? So if you look at, in the mix console here, you could have, it's not going to be the same because if you're doing it, you have multiple input channels. So when you go to kind of like your main meter here, it's going to, be based upon the mix bus here. But if you go to the channels here. So let's say we have these channels and you right click, you could go to the global meter settings. And at this point you could choose the global meter position. So if you wanted to just have the input, you could just have the input metering here by default and have this be, but at this point, as it's kind of going through the whole signal flow, if you have 24, or two channels, you'd want to see each of the inputs, independently. And you could also just, go to your input channels here. You can see the input channels, the meters here, and you could have that on a separate mixer, or you could just, switch to where the meter position is set for the particular channel. So if you're building up a mix, a lot of times people will just kind of switch their meter position to be post fader or input, depending on what they want to do. So those are options, but there currently isn't a way to see this. But if you're doing more than one track, it's probably not as practical, I would imagine. So I just see a question. I'm having problems in exporting videos with music added. Any help appreciated? Cubase Pro 10.5, Windows 10. It may be hard to say. I'm not sure what type of problems you're having. So if there's any way, maybe for GH Janice, that you could indicate what exact problems you're having, but I've found it to be reliable, and work, well with a number of different files. So, all right, seeing comment. I wish that Steinberg could have released Absolute 4 prior to all of the samples in this summer sale. It's like selling records before selling a record player. Yeah, so with Absolute 4, if you, and part of the summer sales, you may not need all the content in Absolute 4, but you may want to get some of them. And I think all of them except Hallian are not in Absolute 4. So but hopefully if you wanted to jump into Hallian, you could do that as well. Yeah, and as mentioned in the next comment, it did that because a lot of people asked for samples for their Hallian and for their Absolute 4 that they already have. All right, my timeline just jumped to my chat, so... All right, so Keith Young says, sorry, I forgot to add my email to the question for you. Can the different layers and loot be transferred to the mix console? Thank you. I wrote to see if I could get a license for loot, and I haven't gotten a license for it to check. So I'm hoping that maybe by Friday's hangout I will see if I could have a copy of the loot so I could answer it correctly. But I still, I wrote right after the hangout on Friday, and it's just Tuesday, and there's a lot of people in Germany this time of year that are on holiday. So, okay, so Greg, please help. What is the fastest way to quickly share notation between Cubase and Dorco? So it's probably going to be exporting and importing music XML files. So this is kind of a more, so once you're in a particular notation view, if you, have, different settings that have been, implemented, directly in here, once you have it in the score editor, you could export as music XML, or you could do standard MIDI files. But a lot of the notation aspects, if you kind of painstakingly have set them up in music XML, will translate to Dorco. So question, is it possible to upgrade from Elements to Pro? Yes, you definitely can. So at any time you could jump up the ladder, so kind of, I think the terminology that Steinberg uses, like if you're staying within Cubase Elements, like if you go from Elements 10 to Elements 10.5, that's called an update. But if you go from like Cubase Elements to Artist or Elements or Artist to Pro, that's an upgrade. So you could definitely jump up from Elements to Cubase Pro and do an upgrade. Another question with Dorco. Or is there a way to route MIDI straight from Dorco out into Cubase that could be recorded in Cubase? There may be a third-party like loopback utility that does that, but it's not quite set up that way. Now that I think Dorco is kind of fully realized with kind of, a lot of major components, and the team has, done a phenomenal job of getting so many features so fast that that there's going to be more of a focus on the integration between the two programs as well in the future. So all right, good to see Creed on a Hangout. Okay, sub 403's got to go, so we'll hopefully see you on the next Hangout. So just to see a quick question. Hey, Greg, what kind of producer would you recommend Cubase for? Cubase works really well on a lot of different functions. I often do when I do a lot of seminars or trainings, I'll say, if you are a hip hop guy or doing EDM, this is why you want to run Cubase. And if you're a film composer and I do a completely different section, this is why you want to run Cubase. If you're recording bands, this is why you want to run Cubase. And it's, very strong in, many different, aspects, whereas other programs kind of could really pigeonhole you into particular workflows. And I think that with Cubase, you have kind of a better chance of being able to kind of do a bit of everything really well, especially with the included tools. All right, I'm going to go to some of the questions that were submitted in advance. So let me jump over. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. And if you have any particular questions you want to submit in advance, you could send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de. And if you put your email address, that's always helpful because sometimes I could just do a quick response. All right, so let me go ahead and just look through some of the questions. Sorry for hitting the microphone with my headphones. All right, so we had a question kind of about, how to deal with, some time warp with tempo detection. So let me adjust the mic here. One thing I've never been able to quite figure out the time warp is how to correct the dodgy tempo detects. Say the track is around 120 BPM and occasionally the detect creates events that don't correct resulting spikes or 170 BPM quickly, ramping back down to 120 BPM. I try deleting tempo track keyframes, and that affects the keyframes after. So, kind of the best way of doing this. So let's just jump back to one of our projects. And why Cubase, after you do a tempo detection, one of the things that it does is it actually will kind of place you directly into the time warp tool. So I will let me revert this file back to our starting point. So we have, our file here, and we're playing along, and I'll just do my tempo detection. And there's some, adjustments that you could do here. So let's say, now if you find that you have like some spikes in the tempo as you're kind of working with this, so let me just define the downbeat. All right, so we'll do this kind of on our signature track. So I'll close this. So as we're, it places you in the time warp tool. So we'll put our 4/4 measure there. And what you could do once the time warp tool is active, let me just clear my throat. Hang on. So once this tool is active, this will allow you to just adjust the bar. So I will put this directly under. Let's make this obnoxiously big. So at this point, you could say, this is like a 7/8 measure. And what you can do with the time warp tool is just kind of move the tempo here to adjust. But once you make an adjustment here, what Cubase will do is actually, do an analysis from that point on in the file and redo it. So if you say, okay, this just needs to be here instead, then it does a quick analysis and will readjust the tempo based on that. So if you just kind of edit these out, these will still be there. But as you make an adjustment in the time warp here, that those will automatically just kind of carry over. So I would just do straight kind of time warping and make sure that it's kind of aligned before you move on. And that could save you a lot of the problems. And that's why it kind of puts you into that tool right there. All right, so we had this question from a previous Hangout. I think we covered it, but again, it was probably towards the end of, when doing warping, if there was a way to have, like within a warp editor, to have it handle triplets or dotted rhythmic values. So if we're in our audio warp and we have free warp, and we'll just go ahead and kind of zoom down. And as we're kind of warping here, and we have different warp markers, it will kind of snap to 16th notes. So you may notice as we do this, it'll snap to different rhythmic grids. Unfortunately, it doesn't currently take into account triplets or dotted note values. So, but I'll mention that again. Okay, so we had a question about with VST Connect. So let me just open that up. And so it says I used a control room during my regular sessions. So I'm not sure how other third party, it says I followed every instruction with VST Connect, but I can't get it working. Everything looks right, except there is no sound other than talkback. I used a control room during my regular sessions, so you're just not sure why the third party doesn't ever hear the tracks. So if you're kind of in a VST Connect, and I'll get this set up here. So I have two different laptops. I have three different laptops kind of going on here. And I have one that's kind of set up as a VST Connect scenario. So let me get my bass and get it plugged in. Okay, and I'm going to start VST Connect on my other computer here for the Performer version. So when you do this, you have to kind of, understand and I know sometimes with the control room, it can be a little confusing, but, if you start off and just, do a create connect create a, VST connect. So I'm going to just open this and I will go ahead and get the two computers connected. So I'm using the VST Connect Pro. So and let me see if I have this. So right now I could, I'll switch over so you could hear what the performer is listening to. So right now I have what is being heard on the studio end and the performer end. So if I wanted to record, what's going to happen is one of the things is to make sure that when you go to the control room that, you send I'm going to just have a drum part here. So I will listen. And what I need to do is to just have this particular sound, and I need to route this to the control room. So I'll just come over here to the Q send, and that's what you could actually hear on the control room. But you also probably want to have the bass being sent out to the control room. So if you can't hear that, make sure that you have the bass. And at this point, like as you go to hit record, so let's say I hit record now. So at that point, make sure that you actually have the performer kind of set up. And as you do this, so make sure that when you're doing this, that the actual control room Q mix is enabled. So sometimes people will have it so that, they forget to turn on the Q mix for the performer as well. And that's probably going to be what is causing the issue. All right, so let's go ahead and I'll shut my bass off. Okay, so let's go to next question. All right, so it says, I had a question during, let me switch projects. It says, I had a question on August 4th Club Cubase Hangout session regarding the following question. You'd asked me to send an email to you on the topic. Is it possible to assign a shortcut key to toggle between the Q mix and the main mix? So if we want to do this, I found the key command. So if you go to the mix console or go to key commands and look in control room, so we'll just come directly to control room. And then it's going to be select control room source. So I assigned command control plus option Q. So as soon as I do that, I could, hitting that key command, we could watch it go from the mix to the external to Q mix 1, Q mix 2, 3, 4. So as I just go back and forth between those different things. That's the key command that you could use to switch between the Q mix and the main mix. And if you don't have the external, you just have one Q mix, it would just go back and forth between the two. So once again, the key command is found under control room, select control room source. All right, let's go to our next question. So we had a question about using the UR44C with a control room and two sets of monitors, but the person wanted to have both monitors function simultaneously, because feeling that one of the monitors, that the two of them kind of worked out the deficiencies between them. So currently with the UR44C, when you set up for the control room, the intention is, when you go to your audio connections, the intention is that you have kind of separate monitor sources. So you go back, you choose monitor A or monitor B, monitor C, or D, not to have A and B. Now with the UR44, you have a monitor output as well as a line output. So I think if you want to have both of them going on at once, it's not a control room function, but the master volume on the front panel allows you to have, to control the volume of the monitor out. I'm pretty sure I didn't get a chance to try this and kind of redo my studio. So I think if you just have one of the speakers going to outputs 1 and 2, that will kind of be fixed, and the main out. And if you wanted to bring in the other monitor, you could just adjust the volume of the physical main monitoring volume knob and use that to bring in the other monitor if you wanted both of them to play at the same time. All right, and we had discussed this on the last hangout of someone that bought the wrong Hallian upgrade version, and to see if I could help them out with that. So it's really, you could contact I think they're based in the UK, and I think if you contact Steinberg support, and I'm not sure, you may have heard back from them already on this, but if you contact the main Steinberg support, they may be able to work. When we have our online shop that's actually being run by, I think, a company, it was AskNet, and I think they're now branded as Nextway or something like that. And that, they're basically like a dealer that handles all of our online shop for us. So as we work with them, if you purchased a wrong update, you have to kind of go through Nextway to do that. We obviously have, because they're our online shop, that there's kind of a deep relationship there. So often if you contact both them and Steinberg support, they may be able to get a refund for you for the wrong purchase. So, I know our support department in the US often does that with, their counterpart here in the United States. So I'm sure that there's a similar relationship in Europe with that as well. Okay, so I had a question. It says, using the Swan brass in a template, I assign a different unison anti-phasing setting in Cubase Pro 10.5 for ensembles, but when I reload the template, all of the brass have the same setting. So from the question, I'm not sure if it's a setting, and maybe you could specify an email, and if you include your email, I could just respond if it's a setting within the Cubase mixer or a setting within the plugin itself. So sometimes if plugins aren't recalling their own settings, it's indicative of something on the plugin side. Sometimes plugins will only recall like a preset. So you may have to save a separate preset with those settings. So that may be something to try to get your template to load as expected. Okay, and then we had a question on trying to play chords in real time. So it says, I would be grateful if I could get some help with a problem that I cannot solve. For example, a bass pattern on a MIDI track in C. How can I make it change? Change to, for example, F or G when I play live chords on another track. I hope there's a solution with chord track. So this is probably dealing with live transform mode. And if you've dealt with live transform mode, I'll show you an example of it. And it's kind of takes, just checking time, maybe like more of an opposite approach. So if we have a part, let's say we have just a quick bass part here in MIDI. We could tell this particular track to follow chords. So if I wanted to come here, let's say it's in the key of C, we could say follow chords and scales. And as we do this, it could play back, and let me just unmute this. And this would automatically kind of, as we change the key, the chord here, you can see the MIDI information change accordingly based on that. Now, if you wanted to play an existing part, let's say if I just want to play like a string part, we could use live transform, but what live transform does is it doesn't take the chords that you play and change the MIDI. What it does is it doesn't take the chords that you play and, change it based on the chords you play, but you could play any part in and have it kind of automatically follow the existing chord track. So it's not, so you could play any MIDI in and it will map it to a chord track, but it's not going to take the chords that you play and use that as the basis for the chords, for the chord changes. So I'll show you an example of so it's kind of the opposite, I think, of what you want to do. But I'll open it up just so you could see. I'll just take like a little ballad of a song here. And as we're kind of listening along, and say if I want to go to a string part, so I'm just going to play kind of like any MIDI part. So let's say, all right, let me just check. See if I may still have. Just go to my. So if I would, let me just see what I'm not hearing. So what I could do is play any three notes and it could follow the chords. So I will just, so if I have a MIDI part here, I go to my project and I can say, let's just create chord symbols. And then what the live transform allows you to hit kind of the same 3 MIDI notes. And you could hit the same 3 MIDI notes. And as you work with that, what that's going to do is as you hit any MIDI notes, it'll map it out to the chords in the chord track. But it's not going to take the actual chords you play and map the existing MIDI to that. You could, record a part, extract a chord track, and then be able to modify based on that. But it needs to do it from the basis of a chord track as opposed to the basis of your live input, if that makes sense. All right, let me jump back to some more. All right, we have just a couple minutes left here if we have to wrap up. Let's see if there's a quick question. If we go beyond 4 hours, we lose all the automatic closed captioning. All right, so let's go through some other questions. We'll see if there's a quick one. Okay, so I just see a quick question. Okay, it says answer question about displaying all MIDI events on a track in the key editor, but my problem is with overlapping MIDI events, seeing notes that hang from the previous event. So let's see if we could set this up. I may not have time to set it up, but I could see if you want to send me a quick email, Lawrence, we could see if we could. I'd be happy to kind of take a look at it for the next Hangout. Okay, so we see a question, how can I completely delete old Cubase projects? So if you were diligent and each folder has its own, if you have each project in its own folder, all you have to do is within your Finder or Explorer, just delete that particular, that particular folder, and that will do it and delete the projects. Okay, so with that, we're just right at about 4 hours. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for wonderful questions. If you've learned something new, please feel free to like the video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that. Also, send questions in advance to Steinberg or clubcubase@steinberg.de, and we could see you on Friday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern, same time we started today. And thank you very much. We'll go ahead and end and see you in 3 days. Have a great day. Bye.